So having listened to the first 50 Doctor Who Big Finish stories from the main range, I thought before I continue any further, because I have got more on the way, I thought I'd go through and rank all 50 of them and then give you my top 10. Well, I've managed to put all 50 into a list. I've got my top 10 here. If you want to know where other stories from the first 50 ended up, comment down below asking and I'll let you know. But this right here is my top 10 Big Finish Doctor Who stories of the first 50. Here we go. My number 10 spot would probably go to the 8th Big Finish story, Red Dawn. It's a story that I think a lot of people would overlook, but I honestly really enjoy it. It features the 5th Doctor as well as his companion Perry Brown, played by Nicola Bryant, and it also features Peter Davison's daughter, Georgia Moffat. She, of course, would later come back for the Doctor's daughter, but hey, for a first story for her, I think this is a really good one. I do like the way that they ultimately end up outsmarting the bad guy, and how can you really go wrong with an Ice Warrior story? My number 9 would go to the 6th Big Finish story, The Marian Conspiracy. Now, this is ultimately the story that introduced Maggie Stables as companion Evelyn Smythe, but for a purely historical story where the 6th Doctor gains a new companion who's not the typical norm, who's not the typical kind of young girl who's kind of joined the Doctor to see everything, but rather somebody a little more kind of experienced who's likely to give him a good slap should the moment arise. I think this is a good one. Evelyn Smythe, I feel, is a great companion. This was her first story. It's a purely historical story, seeing her trying to survive the reign of Queen Mary, and honestly, I think it's a good one. Have a listen for yourself. My number 8 would go to the 40th Big Finish story, Jubilee. Now, this, of course, provided a lot of inspiration for the 2005 Ninth Doctor episode, Dalek, to which they were both written by Robert Shearman, so that's hardly a surprise. But it is nice to hear the 6th Doctor and Evelyn Smythe back at their adventures, having a go at a Dalek and an alternate timeline where they're kind of keeping a Dalek in the Tower of London, and ultimately how dark our civilization is with the Daleks involved. I also do like the kind of misdirection they give you throughout the story, kind of making you believe from here that Davros is also in there, but ultimately we'd have to wait for Davros for a bit. But yeah, Jubilee, that goes to my number 8. Number 7 for me comes the 19th Big Finish story, Minuet in Hell. It's nice to hear the 8th Doctor and Charlie Pollard having another great adventure in America this time. It does provide an interesting kind of political quandary with a potential 51 states for America, as well as admittedly some pretty heavy religious symbolism, but I don't think it goes too far. And to be honest, Nicholas Courtney's Brigadier meeting up with the 8th Doctor, I'm down for any of the Doctors meeting up with the Brigadier, and this was one we never got to see on screen, but I'm glad it happened. At number 6, I've got possibly the earliest Big Finish story on my entire top 10 list, that being number 5, The Fearmonger. Honestly, this one I feel is underrated, but really is a gem. While I said Minuet in Hell carried some political undertones, this is pretty much drowning in them. But at the same time, I can hardly deny an adventure with the 7th Doctor and Ace, and honestly, this one I feel was a really good one. It's a story of political intrigue, of how fear can grip the mind, and how even in political strategizing, people can take advantage of emotions. And honestly, I feel it's done really well here. I may have made a mistake with one of the actors who I thought was in it, who turned out to be someone else, but I still maintain The Fearmonger is a great story that you should check out. My number 5 choice is probably the most surprising on my list, and it's number 38, The Church and the Crown. I found this rather surprising, but honestly, it's still a pretty good story. Based loosely on the classic story of Alexander Dumas's The Three Musketeers, shows the Fifth Doctor, Peri, and Erimem kind of trying to work their way through revolutionary France. And I actually think it does a really good job and provides a really fun story in the style of the Musketeers. So, yeah, as much as it might surprise me, my number 5 choice is The Church and the Crown. And number 4, I'd probably put The Chimes of Midnight, the 29th Big Finish Doctor Who release. I gotta be honest, I'll always be a sucker for a Doctor Who Christmas special. Whether it's on TV, one of the multitudes on TV, whether it's in the comics with Time Out of Mind. Big Finish did their own version of a Christmas special with The Chimes of Midnight, and I gotta admit, I think it's a pretty great one. The Eighth Doctor and Charlie in the middle of a Christmas murder mystery at an old house, seeing it connect back to Charlie's childhood and address the fact of those she left behind when she seemingly disappeared. And I honestly think it's a pretty great mystery. It's a great mystery, a great Christmas special, and it comes in at number 4 on my list. My number 3 spots, I'll admit, on any other day, The Chimes of Midnight at my number 4 would probably move up and down with my number 3, depending on how you look at it. But my number 3 for the moment goes to the 9th Big Finish story, The Spectre of Lanyon Moor. I have to admit, I love a good mystery involving the kind of mystical elements. So it's like imps and goblins and the like. So having them out on the kind of Highland moor, that kind of does make it work for me. I do love this story for those elements. Colin Baker and Maggie Staples are on top form, and I do like that it is also a story that features Nicholas Courtney as the Brigadier. It does also feature one of my favourite bits between the Doctor and the Brigadier. It's like, well, given the fact that you appear to know a lot about this kind of mystical sort of thing, the fact your dress sense, and the fact you just appeared from nowhere, am I to assume that there's a blue box parked somewhere on the moor? You're catching on, Brigadier. Good to see you, Doctor. Which, I don't know, I just love that. So, yeah, The Spectre of Lanyon Moor for me comes in at number 3 on my top 10. My number 2 spots would go to the 25th Big Finish story, Colditz. Now, while most Doctor Who stories kind of feature kind of aliens, monsters, supercomputers, all the rest of it, some of the greatest or best Doctor Who stories are the ones where the Doctor and their companions are just trying to survive particularly dangerous or dark period in human history, and Colditz fills that role perfectly. It does also feature an appearance by a pre-10th Doctor, David Tennant, as Feldwebel Kurtz as the main villain of the story, and it does change the Doctor and Ace's relationship on a fundamental level, as she now has to deal with the fact that travelling with the Doctor isn't always going to be all fun and games. There is an element of danger to it and darkness that ultimately does change the way she sees it and does make her consider maybe it's time she grew up. So, all in all, Colditz is a dark story, but it's well worth it and one of the best in my opinion. But not the best. Because for me, of the 50 first stories in Big Finish's main range, my number 1, my favourite, and the one I think is best of the first 50 stories, is number 34, Spare Parts. This story, it's bleak, it's haunting, it's scary, and to me, it's just the best. In the 1980s, there was supposedly a story that was planned out called Genesis of the Cybermen, fairly a Cybermen version of Genesis of the Daleks. However, it was never picked up, and later Doctor Who stories like World Enough in Time and the like, they would argue and produce their own versions of the Cybermen's birth. But this one, released in 2003, I think, I'm not entirely sure on that, this I think is the most beautiful. I mean, as I said, it's a dark story, but at the same time, it's one that you can legitimately believe, and it's haunting to listen to. I mean, just when the girl who's been turned into a Cyberman returns to her father and he tries to get the mask off, and it's just, you'll be scared of this, but at the same time you'll cry. This is a story I think everyone should listen to, and that's why it's my number one Big Finish story, at least of the first 50. Have a listen to it for yourself. And what are your own top 10 Big Finish stories from those first 50 stories? I've got more to come, but for the time being, Spare Parts is my number one. Anyway, as I said, I'd love to know your top 10 Big Finish stories. Let me know down below. And until next time, see ya.